I want to discuss with you today about the Department of Public Safety. Um, Much of what you have seen in the streets is compounded by what happens in institutions throughout the state of North Carolina. If you think inmates are safe once they are imprisoned, guess again. The only rule that they had at Maury Correctional Institution was that they would tell all of the officers that you could do anything that you want to any inmate in the building as long as you didn't get caught on tape and as long as they didn't see it. I repeat that. You could do anything to any inmate in the building as long as you didn't get caught on tape and they didn't actually, your supervisors didn't actually witness it. In one case, this is the case of inmate Mullins. He was brutally beaten. The inmate, they asked him to come out of his cell, which he did. Officer Russell, Officer Christian Thomas Russell, pulled his boxers down to give him a wedgie, and the officers were harassing him about being in an interracial couple with his wife. And the inmate stated that an officer then twisted his handcuffs so hard that he jumped and he shouted in pain. And at that time, the officers started yelling, "Quit resisting," over and over. He said that Officer Russell then slammed him into the upper mezzanine gate and placed his hands around his neck, briefly to choke him. But he removed them real fast. Inmate Mullins then stated that Officer Russell slammed him 4 times into the gate, attempting to make his face smash against the gate. He stated that Officer Russell and Collins carried him into the room, and once in the room, Officer Russell pushed his face down on the steel bed and used his right hand to punch him in the face exactly 7 times. Inmate Mullins went on to state that Officer Russell then slammed his head against the wall. Inmate Mullins goes on to state that Officer Collins and Russell then picked him up and stood him on the steel of the bed and pulled his legs out from under him, causing his face to hit the steel and burst open his chin. He stated that the officers then threw him into the floor and kept bending his wrist. Inmate Mullins stated the whole time one of the officers was punching him in the back of his neck, and he was not resisting. He said the entire time he was begging them to stop, and they kept saying they don't care about him begging. He stated also that they made him walk barefoot down the stairs backwards while he twisted his handclasp so bad that his wrists sustained lacerations from pressure. Now, Lieutenant Fleming conducted the flawed investigation. He says, as for the allegations expressed by inmate Mullins concerning misconduct on the part of Sergeant Smith, C.O. Russell, C.O. Collins, and C.O. Spence, there is no evidence available. And I stress the word available to sustain the inmate's allegations, while carefully concealing the statements from 3 other inmates who witnessed the savage beating of inmate Mullins. And not only that, but we do have the, thanks to Mr. Daniels, we do have the statements from each one of those inmates. Inmate Justin Scott said that inmate Mullins had complained for several days about not receiving his legal mail after the legal mail officer came to his door with mail several days earlier. Sergeant Smith, Officer Spence, Officer Russell, and Officer Collins and Officer Switcherino came to the inmate Mullins' door and asked him to cough up. And I watched as suddenly they snatched Mullins off his feet and slammed him against the door of the mezzanine in front of his cell, and someone said, "Take him to the cell." And Mullins was dragged into his cell, and they could hear the officers beating. And when he brought him out of his cell, his face was bloody. Inmate Divers said, "On the 9th of April, I observed Sergeant Smith, Officer Russell, Collins, Smith, Switcherino go up the stairs to put C10 in full restraints," C10 being Officer Mullins, about 5:19 p.m. He was brought out of his cell after being cuffed from behind. Then all of a sudden the officers snatched him into the cell and started beating on him while he was handcuffed from behind. I heard him yelling for officers to stop and saying that he wasn't resisting. Then I observed them bring him down the stairs while twisting his wrists, and his face had a lot of blood on it. And they say all you have to do is rewind the cameras. There's a statement by another inmate. They threw him up against the gate and said that he was resisting. Afterwards, they dragged him into his cell and started beating him. I could hear Zach screaming that he wasn't resisting, and I could hear him throwing him around in the room. So the problem is with the Department of Public Safety, first you have inmates being brutally beaten. You have officers being refrained for simply reporting such an incident. And that is where we have issues. Inmates being brutally beaten. The only rule at Maury is that you can do whatever you want to any inmate as long if you're white and it happens behind closed doors, and as long as you don't get caught on camera. That's the only policy there is there. It's interesting to note that Captain Fleming, who conducted an investigation, cleared everybody and stated there was no evidence available, while holding the evidence that was available that supported the inmate statements, as did Mr. Herring. Mr. Herring has endangered the lives of black inmates. He has a lot of alleged racism with him. When he came into Maury, he immediately promoted someone black to a position, and then after that for over a year and a half, if not close to 2 years, he failed to promote anybody black who was at Maury to a sergeant's position if they were a male for a period of 2 years. And the other problem that we have at Maury is the use of false evidence to destroy people's careers. Now, I was the officer who reported that inmate Mullins had said that they had used excessive force. And for that, I was placed under investigation for over 140 days, while the officers who had brutally beat the inmates were not placed under any investigation whatsoever. And I was subject to numerous insane investigations. They had a truck that they had bought after a white officer had wrecked the brand new truck they had. It was 10 years old. And I sat in it and drove around the front and just a fourth of the way around the back. And I was accused of causing the transmission to go out in the truck, placed under investigation. And they used false evidence. Lied under oath, and forced my lawyer, who was supposed to be supporting me, to basically throw 3 separate cases, to do everything that he could do to throw 3 separate cases. At one point, they sent me to Vidant Medical, which is where they had been using Nurse Cook to end the careers of dozens of black officers. She accused me of being asleep when she never even entered the room. And she wasn't out there for 15 minutes to watch me do anything for 15 minutes. And like I said, she never entered the room. And she said she took pictures. But these are the pictures she had. Now this is the picture, the evidence photo attached to the police report. Now the issue is, there's nothing in there that you can see. And if you take this picture and blow it up, and take hours to blow it up, that's what you get. She didn't have any pictures. And in her statement, she stated she didn't have any pictures. She didn't say anything about having any pictures. But Mr. Daniels actually made up the evidence and made up this picture of Russell, these pictures of Russell sitting in the chair. And you can see that there is no light in these pictures. She said there would be no light, but you can see light in the pictures. And you can see that this is actually Russell, because I'm only 5'6", and this is the back of the chair right here. You can see his head, you can see his back, and you can, she said this is his eye in the chin that she was able to see, and saying that was my eyeball shed that I have in the center of my chin that I wasn't aware of. But here's the investigator, and he seemed to think he got it backwards. He says that this is the man's face here, and it's covered up. And so that's Mr. Brown's face, so therefore Mr. Brown, there's no way he could be alert to what was going on. And therein lies the problem. He didn't ever talk to her to see that she wasn't out there for 15 minutes, to witness me doing anything for 15 minutes. He didn't ever talk to her to see which way the person's head was turning in the photos, and he got it backwards, thought my head was covered up when it wasn't. And he never talked to me about the photo, the chairs. The chair stops right along here, and you can see it right here really well. The chair stops right here. Well, all this up here is Russell. I'm only 5'6". When I sit on a standard size chair, there's nothing above the chair but my head, ever. And there is, you know, they made up evidence. They have nurse cook. She's cost about, at the time, more than 12 people their jobs, all of them black males, I'm sure. And just setting them up to lose their jobs. And now we're to the point that we have 3 empty prisons. They have nobody to put in them, because at the end of the day, black officers and white officers are not treated the same. If they don't have the evidence to fire a black officer, they will make up the evidence. But when it's a white officer and they don't have, and they have evidence that he committed a crime in this case, they will conceal the evidence. There's no evidence available, says the investigator. And something that investigator Fleming did too was he, instead of going up there to talk to the inmates and see who wanted to make statements, he turned it over to a sergeant, the same sergeant who had been on the unit prior with Russell beating up on the inmates, so that people would not feel free to write statements. And still they got 3 statements as it was. In a separate incident, C.O. Perry reported that at approximately 11:20, during the chow hall, Curtis Wise inquired about not having meat on his kosher meal. And she said that she walked away briefly, and when she returned, the inmate was still seated calmly. The precise statements: I walked away, and when I came back, the inmate was saying that he wasn't being treated fairly. The inmate stated that he just wanted his proper portions. C.O. Perry reported that he continued to ask to speak to someone else about his tray. And C.O. Russell, the same one, called the inmate a pussy and told him he was done. And C.O. Perry reported that the inmate refused to leave because he hadn't even eaten any of his food. And C.O. Perry reported that C.O. Russell gave the inmate several directives to leave the dining hall, but he refused to comply. C.O. Perry reported that C.O. Russell grabbed the inmate by the wrist, preparing to handcuff him. He reported that he was visually upset but remained calm. And he reported that C.O. Russell hit the inmate's head against the table 3 times and then cuffed the inmates. And that the inmate never appeared hostile. And the inmate had told him earlier, okay man, go ahead because I see I can't talk to you. He further stated that by this time the kosher cook had come and he was telling him about his diet. And like I said, inmate Wise stated Officer Russell said, quote, little pussy, running your mouth. Inmate Wise stated that he did not respond. He just turned to finish listening to what the kosher diet cook was saying. Inmate Wise stated that when he did, Russell yanked his arm and twisted, trying to break his arm, and twisting it behind his back, slamming his face into the table for nothing. Inmate Wise stated that he did not resist and he did not do anything as far as a threatening gesture or make a threat to him. Inmate stated he was just sitting there and Officer Russell assaulted him for no reason. Now, Captain Williams states that she noticed Officer Russell had inmate Wise's face in his plate with his arm extended outward. And then Captain Williams states that she did not observe or witness the actions of the staff which led to this. And she's a captain. She should have been running things, and when she saw what was going on, she should have broken up then. And if it had been anybody black, she would have had 50 questions that man had to answer then and there, and would have sent him out of there, because I've dealt with her before. But when it's a white guy, I don't know what led up to it. I didn't see what happened prior. And we have people in charge who are supposed to be superior officers, and they're as afraid of their jobs as anybody. And that's the problem with having Mr. Daniels in charge, who's an alleged sexual predator. Now, an officer is prohibited from using force solely as a result of verbal provocation. An officer shall not strike or attempt to strike an inmate who has abandoned his or her resistance, or who is effectively restrained, who was never resisting from the very beginning. The use of force is strictly prohibited, but that's not what they tell the officers, not the white officers anyway. They tell them you can do anything to any inmate that you want to, as long as you don't get caught on tape. And I'm your supervisor as long as I don't see it, as long as the supervisors don't see it. And so that leads to all kinds of George Floyd situations. Bodies have been rolled out of Murray for years, rolled out of there. And he was beaten by the gangi, is what they say. Or he committed apparent suicide. They're out there hanging them for the holidays and celebrating and high-fiving. And it needs to be brought to an end. And this happens not at Maury, but at every prison practically in the state of North Carolina. While the staff that are honest and hardworking, that will tell the truth, they are systematically framed using false evidence and fired. And the lady said, it does, they forced her and they kept on her. And she said, well, they forced her to say that she didn't think that the Officer Russell hit his head intentionally. Now the investigator says she recanted. No, she just said she doesn't think it was intentional. That doesn't mean she didn't say she witnessed him slamming his head against the table 3 times. It doesn't mean that she didn't say that they witnessed his nose in the tray. And for the investigator, who's doing nothing but being a gutless yes person, to say that, at first he says she made some allegations, Mr. Daniels, concerning Russell. and that he had used inappropriate language and slammed the inmate's head on the table, but she recanted. She did not recant the fact that the head was slammed against the table. She just said she did not think it was intentional. And there's plenty of pictures of how bad the inmate was injured and that they had, but they claimed they didn't have any evidence while withholding the evidence that they actually had. And Daniels was saying, well, she hadn't had the indoctrination. She doesn't need to have indoctrination to know what she heard and to be able to say what she saw. And I guess they must have forgotten the photos of the inmate showing the lacerations that they did to his arm, tongue, lip, head, etc. And they noted that it goes on to say, also note reaction from inmates, no reaction, meaning they didn't riot. Well, by slamming that man's head in the chow hall, where there are probably fewer than less officers in there than 10, way less, usually it's about 7, they could have started a full-on out riot. If he had been black, they immediately walked him out the door, put him under investigation, walked out the door. You could have started a riot in here. We don't need your services no more because you're black. But by him being white, they cleared him once again. Now, C.O. Russell is the same C.O. Russell that was trained to be a police officer with Greenville PD. And he was throwing a party one night in Winterville at his house, and they got to fighting and this and that. He was drunk. He bit into somebody's house and then to somebody's arm and this and that, and everybody was talking about how out of control he was. They arrested him, and the people at Greenville Police Department saying this is not the kind of behavior they expected from such an individual, and they went on and hired him as a police officer despite that. And it's just a matter of time before he gets to slamming some young black citizen who's walking from East Carolina with his white girlfriend to the pavement and kills him. It's just a matter of time. He has a explosive temper, which I've witnessed, and he has a drinking issue, which he admits. And he uses excessive force, which apparently he's lied about, every single time he gets a chance. Now, I reported the situation with inmate battle. And for that, I was placed under investigation for over 140 days when they had no authorization from the secretary or the personnel director to keep me under investigation. Now, the inmate, they prevented him from getting treatment. So he was in his cell for 19 hours. He could reach up and touch the bone in his skin. And I reported that the inmate said they had used excessive force. And to have done that, I mean, I'm hearing the man in charge now saying, make sure they know they have a duty and an obligation to report. It's report, 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 and make sure you report so somebody actually reports something. And then when something gets reported, you are a snitch. You are a traitor. You are an inmate, is the way you treat it. And they make up the evidence. They use false evidence. They lie under oath. They alter documents. And they have Minister Gary Parks, a pastor, altering documents and lying under oath and manufacturing evidence is just unbelievable. Along with the superintendent, alleged sexual predator Daniels. Now, there have been 4 employees that were killed at Pasco Tank. 5, I'm sorry. And more than 150 people called Mr. Steinberg to complain, including inmates, how bad the good old boy system they have going at the Department of Public Safety is running. And Steinberg has said himself, the people holding jobs are not because they're qualified, but as political payback. You know, it's utterly egregious and disrespectful to the memories of the slain officers to place Dennis Daniels in command of Pasquotank or any other institution for any amount of time. Because he was the one that was there prior to the incident at Pasquotank, firing everybody that was black for every little thing under the roof while allowing white officers to engage in brutal beatings of inmates, which he has done at Maury, and there's no question about it. Mr. Gray allegedly made sure that the inmates who had the injury to his chin was stitched in the hallway. He wasn't sent out for medical, to the Vidant medical. Stitched him in the hallway. And he had to file a grievance for them to do that much for him. Now, Yolanda Harrison, she's a young lady that observed the brutal beating of Federal Freddie Pickett by John Gray and, again, Christian Thomas Russell. She alleges that Gray was on the unit and he was saying he was going to kill him, a nigger, tonight. And so one of the Freddie Grays stabbed him, and they were violently beating the inmate. Russell allegedly picked him up, slammed him to the floor, and they were kicking him and stomping him and everything. And then they realized she saw it, and they forced her to write a statement. Forced a friend of hers to write a statement that she was having sex with an inmate. Then they forced her, told her they would make sure she never saw her kids again. Never saw them again. They set the bail so high, unless she stated that she was having sex with an inmate. And then after that, they called the police on her for simply witnessing what happened to Freddie Pickett. And it's time for these white officers to be held accountable for their actions, not for everybody in the building to be fired while they get to play games and be. And they've made really a game of it, a contest of who can injure the inmates the worst, strictly. So after reporting the brutal beating of the inmates, I was subjected to a number of investigations which were basically ridiculous. And at one point I was sent to Vidant Medical, and they not only made up the evidence against me, they altered documents. In 2007, I received a write-up because a white female that I was in the hospital with was found asleep in a blanket. And they actually altered the documents, and this says that a white female was found asleep in a blanket, and they altered the documents and put me in the same blanket that the white female was found in September 7, 2010. And that's the thing that they do at Maury, altering documents, lying under oath, to get the whatever result that Mr. Daniels wants. Now, I had an attorney, one of the top attorneys in the state of North Carolina. His name was Hike Fieldbeck. And instead of representing me, unknown to me, he was secretly representing the state of North Carolina and did everything he could possibly do to throw not one, not two, but all three of my cases out of the courthouse. He misfiled one of the cases. Actually misfiled two of them. One was the simplest filing the case in the county that I resided in, which is Pitt County. Instead, he filed the case in Wake County, knowing that resulted in the case being thrown out. And he made some determinations that, first of all, one of the issues that didn't get covered has to do with the nature of the lighting of the room. When you're outside the inmate's room, you can read everything that's on the machines. But once you go inside that room, it's pitch dark. There's special tinted glass. And Nurse Cook was saying, oh, they're not responding to my camera when I'm pulling it out and taking a picture or using my cell phone camera. They're not responding to it because they cannot see it. And also the Pitt County Sheriff's Department, the Violent Police Department, I should say, they did their own investigation. And they found the charges that Miss Nurse Cook was making were unfounded. And they cleared it. But here we go with Maury, with someone who never talked to Nurse Cook, and he is racist, and he gets a racist result from his investigation, which is no doubt. He never talked to Nurse Ian, who was in charge of the pod, who was going in and out. Nurse Cook never even entered the pod. So that's the kind of issues that we're facing. And the problem is when Mr. Daniels has someone that he likes, like Connie Albritton or Doris Evans. They were both under SBI investigations for being undue familiar with the inmate. Connie Albritton was subsequently, while under the investigation, was caught with an inmate in programs by 3 officers, Sergeant Lee, K-Pot, and another officer. She was cleared, even though she was already under another investigation. And so Mr. Daniels is set back there and basically micromanage the investigations. The investigations are not fair. He's making up the evidence, withholding evidence. He's condoning the savage beatings of inmates and whatnot to get the result that he wants. There's no fairness in it. And then he wants to, and when you leave Maury, it doesn't stop there. He does everything that he can possibly do to interfere with the person the rest of their lives. Blacklisting from positions with the state of North Carolina that they're entirely, entirely qualified for. I applied for over 53 positions. Then it gets to where he doesn't want you working with anyone anywhere doing anything. And try to interfere with my real estate license. Matter of fact, he hired a gentleman who called himself Donnie Spruill. I don't know who he was. Had him on my car. He wanted to see how it went from a situation where every time you call him to see your house, he was scared to get on the car. Then finally, he wanted to ride, looking at houses each and every day, and he was trying to force me to agree. I'm sure he was secretly recording to take. Basically, he was saying someone else will sell the houses, and when they buy the houses, he was going to pay me under the table. That's a kickback. That's illegal. I didn't know it at the time, but he was trying to record me agreeing to take kickbacks, which would have, which was unbelievable. Mr. Philbeck was my attorney, and he did everything he could to lose the whistleblower case, the wrongful termination lawsuit, and the DES proceedings. He filed them in the wrong courtroom, but he did note that was infuriating. I think anytime any lawyer, if he knows how to prosecute a case for his white clients, when he fails to prosecute 3 cases for his black client, he needs to be terminated. Now, he noted that the lady was undoubtedly lying, she said her documentation, she said her report says she came in twice, but that's not in her documentation. He noted here how she was lying, that sort of thing, numerous times, but then he asked for extension, and he sent the information to the court 2 weeks late, so I would lose my case. And I believe anytime a lawyer fails to prosecute a case simply because the client is black, he needs to be immediately and permanently disbarred from the practice of law for the remainder of his natural life. The issue is equality and fair play. Black officers and white officers are not equal. And that's your problem with the Department of Public Safety. And I don't know how they can think they're going to solve a problem and not ever interview a single person who's ever worked for the Department of Public Safety that had the problem. And that's the problem. That's the issue at the top. They're trying to come up with plans to solve the problem as to why they have 3 prisons empty that nobody wants to work in. It's because your officers are not treated equally. The white guy can come right out of the woods with his GED. You can be like me. I've been there, military background, 10 years in the military, a veteran, 8 years as a corrections officer, a 4-year degree, and he can come out of the woods with his GED and start beating the daylights out of inmates day one, violating policies, and they're coming for him every time and send everybody black out of the door. And Mr. Daniels has an issue with his lack of college education. I noticed that during his interviews. And anytime he can find someone that has a college education, he does everything he can do to destroy them, especially if they're black and male. And like I said, one of the issues, he is a sexual predator, alleged sexual predator. And they've had 30 or 40 years of complaints that substantiate that. And I would appreciate your support. I had applied, I was running in the election, and they got wind of it that I was running, and they got Virginia Cox Daltrey to run in the race, even though she didn't pay her fees in time to be in anybody's race. She's not the winner of North Carolina District 12. She could not have been on the ballot. But they're doing everything to ignore the fact that she didn't pay her fees in time to be on that ballot. My campaign committee is the committee for the Coalition for Unity, Justice, and Diversity. And I would please appreciate any financial support that you can give me. Again, my name is Lenton Brown, and my phone number is 1-252-208.
So I'm going to ask you, how did she not be on the ballot? Can you explain that?
Okay, what it is Virginia Cox Daltrey did not win the race because, number one, she didn't pay her fee, which had to be paid on December the 20th at 12 o'clock. All candidate fees had to be paid by that time. Now, we've researched her record, and her fees were not paid until December the 24th. For that reason, she's not the winner of North Carolina District 12. She could not be on the race for North Carolina District 12. And with that said, there's one other important factor. We looked at each and every one of the 28 districts, 6 of them in Greenville, 22 of them in Kinston, and each race has 2 different results, meaning that the race was rigged in favor of her winning. Each race, each district has 2 different results. Those documents and supporting documents have been sent to the North Carolina, to the state of the Board of Elections, and they've been ducking and dodging the issues, but there's no way she should be on the ballot. There's no way she could have won the race And it was rigged. We did have a young lady who came out, and she's a minister, on the day that it snowed. And she saw these cars parked in one of the precincts, and she went up there and she was turned away by a white lady and a white man. And the precincts should have been closed at that point in time due to the snow. And so we know that there's cheating going on, and the votes were rigged, and there's more than 4,000 votes in question. But Virginia Cox Daltrey didn't pay her fees in time to run North Carolina District 12.
What is the election board saying?
They are moot at this point. They're not really saying anything. The first complaint I filed, they ignored the fact that she hadn't paid her fees in a timely manner. Another complaint is they have a full complaint now. It's 128 pages. I did it myself, and it shows that not only has she not paid her fees in time, that it shows several things. It shows she did not pay her fees in time. It shows that each precinct has 2 different sets of results. It shows that the election results as certified are not supported by the data that they have. So the race was completely rigged. Okay. Once again, I appreciate you listening to me. My name is Lenton Brown, and my campaign committee is the Coalition for Unity, Diversity, and Justice. And I would appreciate your financial support. We need to bring an end to the white supremacy, the racism, the retaliation, the sexual harassment that has become the Department of Public Safety and Moral Correctional in North Carolina. We need to bring an end to that. I appreciate your support. Thank you.